Hi, I'm Mike Maloney, and welcome to another CSRM podcast. Today's episode is hosted by Dr. Greg Linville.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another CSRM podcast. And I'm joined today with Dr. Greg Linville and Scott Stedman. And we're continuing our conversation about the saving of church sports. We're talking about soteriology. And we're talking about this as something that the local church sports minister should be thinking about. And so, Greg, I'm going to dive right in. We're talking about chapter 6. And I think a very important question is this relevant? And why? And if it is, why should the local church sports recreation and fitness minister, why should they care about this?
Yeah, so who cares about soteriology? Here's another Greek word, and I just need to get out there and get my league going. And I've got my skill assessment tonight for my sixth grade league. And it was soteriology. What? Yeah. Well, who cares about it? I would put it back in this way, very crassly, the families of the sports ministers in the local church, the family of the wife and the kids of that sports minister, because if that person is not being effective in their role as leading that sports rec and fitness ministry, they may be out of a job.
Yeah.
And so soteriology is very relevant, because you're not being effective if you're not reaching those who are far from Jesus, and eventually they are becoming dedicated disciples of Jesus, which means they're joining that congregation or another one. And it goes back and forth like that. So as base as that may seem, if you're a sports minister in church and you want to keep doing what you're doing, you need to be successful at this. So you need to understand it. But that leads it to the second, that there literally are billions of people in the world today that, if they knew, would care, because today they don't know Jesus. And we have a tool, we have a strategy, we have a methodology, we have a philosophy. It is really, really effective if we understand it. And so those people around the world would really care. And I just think that our whole community that we're kind of preaching to, the sports outreach community, I think they care because they're struggling with, are we really being effective at this? And as we've said before, that many of the churches elders are saying, every year you say you got so many people that got converted, raised their hand, but the church is not growing. And I think that our sports outreach community, we're all kind of struggling with this, and we care about being effective, or else we're just wasting our time and money and effort.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing for us to focus on there, Greg. So what are some false indicators of success when it comes to having a church sports recreation and fitness ministry that's focused on the right things?
Yeah, and we've coined a term called success statistics. And that would indicate what I've indicated or alluded to rather, and here and previously, that what does your local church or denomination, what does it say is success? And some have said, we just preach the word, we give the verbal gospel, we ask people to say yes to that by filling out a form, by kneeling at an altar, by praying a prayer, by raising a hand. And is that enough? Is that soteriology? Is that really the person getting saved? And I think that sometimes that could be a false indicator. We need to think more about a number of things. Now, some other false indicators might be that those people joined a particular congregation. They signed themselves to a membership card. It might be for others that they got baptized, or if they're in a tradition that baptizes infants, they would have a confirmation. That everybody in the 8th grade gets up in front of the church and say, yes, they're pledging their life to Christianity or the church. It also could go to that they're starting to give money. They start to tithe. They join a particular whatever group in the church. It could be that some say it takes all of that. Yeah, you got to kneel, you got to say, raise your hand, say the prayer, you got to get baptized. So we really have to evaluate what are these success statistics. And so all those things that I've given could be seen as false indicators. And unless we get this idea of what the Great Commission says is success, what is it? A dedicated disciple of Jesus. Go and make disciples. And as we've said previously, what does that mean? Well, it lays it out for us in those 2 verses at the end of Matthew 28, baptizing them. And okay, we'll let you confirm if you don't want to baptize. I prefer that we do baptize those that have come to faith. But wherever you are on that, the next thing is teaching them all. And as we said prior, our good friend Tim Conrad, as he started to study this, Jesus had 50 commands in the Gospels. Well, I don't know about you, Dan and Scott, but I've fallen far short of that. I don't think I've ever, with any one person, taken them through all 50 commands. That doesn't necessarily mean that I failed or you failed, but if we're not getting a half a dozen, 7, 10, if we're not getting some of the basic commands, I'm wondering if we're really making disciples. So the false indicators are anything short of a dedicated disciple.
And let's kind of break that down. What does that look like in a sports ministry context? Maybe it looks like this. Maybe your church is 150 people, but you've got 400 people coming to your basketball league. But because you don't have an overall strategy as to how to lead them to salvation and then how to make them become a dedicated disciple, they don't even come to your church worship services. I find this happens really a lot of times for sports ministers. Their leagues are growing, but there's a disconnect to their worship services, to the life of their church, to small groups. And so maybe it looks like that. Or maybe it looks like you feel like your sports ministry is just a silo. It's kind of that redhead stepchild, so to speak, of your church, and no one really seems like they want to be a part of things there. And so it's something maybe the church says that they have as a program or a ministry, but it's not really valued. Any other things come to mind as a false indicator that maybe things are going well, maybe they're not going so well for your church and your sports ministry?
Well, numbers are they're very often misperceived as to being success. Now, if we don't have any numbers, we're not being successful at all. But just because we have large participation numbers in sports outreach, fitness outreach, recreational outreaches, it doesn't guarantee we're having success. And so that's why we really are trying in this book to help people reevaluate their success statistics. And we know that, yes, it starts with conversion. Well, there's a lot of things that lead up to that. But in terms of that disciple, yes, you have to have a day and a time, some season at least, that, yes, I'm turning my life over to Jesus. But then it needs to keep going. And it's not a stopping place. And again, this is why we call it evangelistic disciple making. Yeah. And we have to kind of change from we're going to preach the gospel to we're going to make disciples. I don't know that we can get much clearer on what we need to change to help us with that. And evangelistic disciple making is helpful because first, it emphasizes that we are to go. Evangelism, we're supposed to go. But then it eliminates us stopping after we've gone, because it's saying we've got to work at making the disciples. So in a local church, this is what you were alluding to, I think, Dan, a little while ago, that what is the plan? How are we taking them? First, how are we going to them to get them involved in our sports outreach community? This goes back to the second book in our series about the two disconnects, getting them from the community into our sports leagues, sports communities. And then after they come to the sports community, how do we get them into the overall body of that congregation? And that comes with a strategy, a step by step, and that here's what we're doing. We're talking to you about Jesus. If you are starting to think about that, then we invite you to what our good friend Rico Tice has started, Christianity Explored, and exploring that there should be some place in the system of a local congregation that once these people have come into the sports community and they start to indicate that they may have an interest in this Christian thing, then take them through a structured Christianity Explored. What does this mean? And then beyond that, Christianity Experienced. Okay, I've explored it. I want to join it. How do I experience it? And then it's just step by step that you have to take people through in terms of your local congregation. And most of our congregations, like you said, Dan, they're in silos. And we have them all in that league. And we proclaim verbally the gospel, but we don't transition them to the next step in the disciple making process. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's entirely true. I mean, I think not only are there silos, there's even different pastors on staff who maybe are the pastor of discipleship, the pastor of evangelism. And so we put these different things in different categories, when what we're talking about here in this chapter and really our overall philosophy at CSRM, it's both and.
Yes.
It should be a part of our holistic strategy to move someone from a baby infant Christian, because we're born again, to somebody who's fully dedicated and somebody who can multiply just like we do in life and lead others to Christ. And our sports rec and fitness outreach programs, they could be a key in doing all of this.
That's right.
And then there's upward influence, right? Because if we're having success in our ministries, our elders, our pastors, our leadership, they're going to see that. And if they're worth their salt, they're going to want that for the overall church. And so if this isn't happening at our local church, instead of getting frustrated, let's do it in our context. And then we have that sort of influence. And then we can influence other churches around us also.
That's right. That's right. And our two R's, Dan, are the relationship and the resources. And what we're doing here is we're providing right now some of these resources, but part of the relationships that we do is that all of us are consulting with individual churches. And there's one particular church that I'm consulting with now in that relationship part of CSRM. And they have now so seen the wisdom of this, having the strategy, that for every new hire that they make on a staff position, that every one of their staff members have to be involved in the sports outreach of the church. For instance, the middle school director is going and helping to coach and be involved in the middle school basketball league and soccer league. And he's taking the, quote, church kids, turning them into missionaries, going into their middle school and recruiting their friends to come play with them in that league. But then that's not all. they're taking their middle school kids that maybe aren't athletically inclined, but they come and they're praying and they build relationships in those leagues and then invite those middle schoolers into the next step. We're having this unbelievable cool night out at whatever center, and we're going to do this, that, the other thing. And it's kind of a green light, invite people. There's going to be very light of any gospel. There's going to be relationship building. But those are the kids that they invited to come play in the league, and now they're coming to this event. And then the next event's at the church. It's still a fun event. It's kind of a yellow. We're going to now talk about, this is the thing about faith. And this church is embracing that whole strategy. And that's what we have to integrate all of the church in that. The men's ministry's doing it. The women's ministry's doing it. All those ministries. They're not turning the ship and firing all their staff.
Sure.
But new hires, it's part of their job description, and they're building those bridges to overcome that second disconnect from the sports community into the church community overall. So for what it's worth, we're excited about that.
Yeah, and we should be. That is very inspiring that we can develop an overall philosophy like this in our local churches. So we are almost out of time, but Greg, I would love if you would tease some of the different obstacles that we'll talk about in our next podcast, the different obstacles to this kind of success at the local church level of everything we're talking about here. So if you want to highlight a couple of things that we can talk about it more in depth in our next recording.
Well, it centers around competition. And this would take us back to the first book in the series about the theology of competition in sport, because there's basically three areas that are major. And one is that competition, what we call competition, has gone berserk and it rules. And everybody's either a winner or a loser, and everybody is just unbelievably mad at each other. The other one is that the competition gone soft, that we downplay it, and we don't engage in it. And then the other one is just that you jettison competition altogether. And those three things are not helpful to a local church. We can tease those out now and go into them, as you say, as we come up to it in a future podcast. But the sports ministry's success is often tied to their theology of competition and how they roll that out.
And those are great things for us to start to think about right now, because I'm sure we're all thinking about something that was done very well when it comes to competition, and then some of those nightmare situations that we have either participated in or been a part of or even led because we haven't fully developed what that competition should look like. So unfortunately, friends, we are out of time. We encourage you, if you don't have a copy of the book, The Saving of Church Sports, hop on over to csrm.org, click on the store menu. You'll see a drop down there, and that'll lead you right to where you can purchase one of these books. We also encourage you, if you want to have a conversation with other people who are doing what you are doing, consider maybe hosting a roundtable in your geographic area. And so you can find out more information about that at csrm.org/roundtables. Having conversations about these podcasts or these resources like this book that we're talking about here is a great way to gather up together with other people who are doing these things, find some encouragement, find some new strategy, find some hope. And so we just encourage you, check that webpage out as well on our website. And unfortunately, we're out of time today. So on behalf of Dr. Greg Linville and Scott Stedman, I'm Dan Stoffer signing off for today. We'll catch you next time. Take care.
The CSRM podcast is a production of CSRM and their production house, Overwhelming Victory. Dr. Greg Linville is the executive producer, and Scott Stedman is the associate producer and editor. To learn more about CSRM, visit csrm.org. For more information about Overwhelming Victory, visit overwhelmingvictory.org. The CSRM podcast is the flagship member of the podcast network Overwhelming Victory Radio. For more information on Overwhelming Victory Radio, or to listen to our partner podcasts, visit overwhelmingvictory.org/OV Radio. For CSRM Podcasts, I'm Mike Maloney. Have a blessed day.